My name is Darcie, and I'm a recovering codependent. And one of the things I struggle with is perfectionism. So what that means is I overplan, which means I will often, when I do these talks, that I will write everything out. And today I did not. Today I have some notes, and today I'm just talking to you from my heart, from my CoDA journey, my experience, how it was, and how it is today, and in the journey from there to here. I picked this topic, it's promise, number 5, feeling loved, loving, lovable. Because when I came into CoDA, I did not feel any of those things. And it dawned on me, I don't know how long into my journey, that I was able to begin believing people when they said they loved me, because I did not for so very long. I grew up in Southern California. I was not abused. I had a loving family. My mom was an alcoholic, and my dad was definitely codependent. And yet I didn't really feel seen in my home. A lot of that, I think, had to do with my mom's drinking. And a lot of it was just the deal that my parents just did not have emotional language. My dad was, a blue-collar worker. He was the son of an agricultural professor who was the son of a farmer, who was the son of a farmer and a son of a farmer. And you know what? It helped me so much to do this genealogy for me, to find out about my father, just because, who else was he going to be except for exactly who he was? And when you looked at my mom's genealogy, you know what? You saw the same thing. My mom was just a wild, crazy woman. And I'm so glad that she met my father, because her wildness met with this groundedness, and somehow gave me the skills I needed to live my life. I blamed her for her alcoholism so much, and for what she could not give me. And when Sharon asked if I would do this talk, I remembered back at one of the talks that I had done for one of the conferences, and I was up sharing my regular victim story, because I always needed people to see how victimized I was. And I'd been in CoDA for quite a long time by then, and I was telling the story of my mother. And I just had a little note jotted down, story of mom. And you know what happened is I froze in the middle of that talk, and that one was in person. So there was, I don't know how many, 100 or 2 people. And I just froze right there at the mic, looking at people, because I dropped in my normal victim story and I went blank. I paused long enough to have to say to everybody, I know that you are all looking at me, hoping that I will get back on track. And I know you're looking at me with care, and I appreciate that. And I will just take a moment. And I did. And, I had to skip that whole part of my story, because it had changed. I didn't know that it had changed until then. So I've forgiven my mom for whatever she could not offer, just simply because my parents did the best that they could do. And I want to tell you another thing. My first program is not CoDA. My first program is a substance program. And when I went into that program, that was 30 years ago. And I would try to tell my story, like I always had, about what happened to me and how I was harmed growing up. And by and large, most people did not want to listen. What would happen, or were unable to listen, maybe. But what would happen is they generally would interrupt and say, but your mom did the best she could. And so I would talk a little about my story, only to be interrupted so many times. And your mom, she did the best she could. So it was like these people I was telling, they weren't hearing me, but they were protecting my mother, whom they'd never met. And that just pissed me off. I'll just tell you the truth. What happened after I joined CoDA was that I realized that while it's true, my mom and my dad, they did the best they could, I had to add something for me during that time, and that it wasn't enough to raise a healthy child, because I needed to have space for my story, because with that on it, I didn't have any space for my story. My parents, my brother and sister, they are much different from me. I do believe that we're all more alike than different. In my family, I'm sure that that is true as well. But in this emotional part, no. That I was born in that family. I needed to have emotions. I wanted to express emotions. And my family just didn't have it. And I have one memory that I keep getting, when I think of my past. And I remember I was very young. I don't know how old. There's kind of a joke in my family that I was 11. Because I had trauma happen to me when I was 11. Like many of you, I was molested. And what meant is that I lost a lot of memories before then. I don't know if any of you have that, but I don't have very many memories before that. But anyways, one time I was talking to my mom. I was sitting on my bed and my mom walked in the door. And then I started talking to her about something. I don't know what. But as I'm talking to her, I'm watching my mom back out of the room while I'm still talking. And then she closed the door while I was still talking. And that is just a good example of how I felt in my life, is that I was saying things, but I wasn't being heard and I wasn't understood. And I knew by the time I was 13 that whatever I needed was not going to be available there in my house. And to be honest, I was very grateful to be able to find a church at that time. So I found a church that was a very literal believing church. And I did start some emotional healing there. And I was able to share my story with some folks about that molest and be able to work through some of that stuff. And I had some very close friends, and I found ways to be able to express my emotion. However, what I didn't know and what I discovered through that time, and it wasn't before I was actually I went to Christian college first. It was actually there that I discovered that I fall in love with women. And, they frown on that in Christian colleges. So I left that college, and this was a secret for a little while, but I can't tell you what that did to me, because basically become the person that I loathed. And I have to say, what a dirty trick. If the God of my understanding then, which is not the God of my understanding now, but the whole idea that somebody who was as people-pleasing as I would, that you would make them gay, I'll tell you what, that's just really not very nice. But that's how it felt. It felt kind of cruel and a very huge dichotomy. This whole idea, I have these literal beliefs, but biologically I am different. And of course, that wasn't the understanding 30 years ago. I ended up, by the way, needing to run away from home. I was 20, so it wasn't all that dramatic. But I did. I ran away from home. I had to leave notes for everybody, the church people, and I just left. And it was there that I actually remember one night that I went out. I was a song leader for my church. And I went out with my guitar one night under the stars up there in Northern California, where I had run to, and broke up with God. I was angry, and I would not say thank you for a beautiful morning, because that's how angry I was. So the next 10 years of my life actually got pretty lost. I ended up, like my mom, I followed her path. So it wasn't hard for me to become an alcoholic. It was already in the genes. And I just added drugs to those as well. I was a drug addict and alcoholic. I would probably be what one might call a functioning one, because I was working and I was in relationships, but I didn't, the jobs I had, I couldn't keep all that long because I couldn't get there on time. I was very bad at that. And the relationships I had, they just lasted too long. So the jobs didn't last long enough and the relationships lasted too long. There's a joke out there in my lesbian world. It says, what does a lesbian bring on the first date? And the answer is a U-Haul. Because we just tend to stay. So that happened to me too many times, in those relationships. They just should not have lasted. But, my last one was the horrible one, but probably the one that saved my life, because I ended up moving in with my drug dealer. Basically, I got to hit bottom after that. So what happened is I found sobriety then in 1991. What I found out is in my alcoholism, I was attracted to people that were a lot like my mom, wild and crazy. And in sobriety, I was attracted to people like my dad. So when I got sober in 1991, I went to my first AA meeting. It was actually in Garden Grove, and everybody always gets a kick out of this. It was called ASH, and that stood for Alcoholic Services for Homosexuals. Probably won't find anything like that anymore, but that's where I went. And I found my new higher power, and her name is Lorian, and she's still my wife today. So, and this is 30 years later. So Lorian is not an alcoholic. Lorian had followed somebody else there, and I just managed to find her. So I'm grateful for that. I could say that now. I don't know that I have said that all of my life. You know, there's a part of our blue book. It says we relied on everything but our higher power to provide us peace, happiness, and well-being. And sure enough, that's exactly what I did. I was relying on Lorian to provide all of that for me. She wasn't up for the challenge, I'm afraid. She was way too much like her. And I really needed her to be more like me, you know, because isn't that what we do? We meet somebody and we embark on the task to turn them into one of me. But she was going to be very strict about not turning into one of me. It's not quite as codependent in the same ways as I was back then. So that was a long time ago. And this is where, you know, I used what I call now my codependent bag of tricks. So we've got a whole bunch of things we do in codependency and that I did. And I could use blame and shame. And what that meant, though, is our relationship had a lot of conflict in it. But I didn't know that I was bringing in the conflict in. See, I thought she was bringing the conflict in. And so I kept trying to get her to get help. Another important part of my story in those early years with Lorian is I had a car accident and I ended up with chronic migraines. So I had chronic pain. I also had chronic back and neck issues. And so while I was continued in AA for quite a long time, I ended up stopping going to AA and I ended up relapsing on pain meds after 8.5 years of sobriety. I ended up getting back into sobriety again, and that was actually my first introduction into codependency, because there was some books that were written back then that I could read. And I remember picking one of them up and I remembered highlighting nearly the whole book because I knew this was my issue somehow. I couldn't really describe it, but I knew it was my issue. Even reading after reading that whole book, I still really was not clear enough to be able to describe what codependency was. But there was a meeting in Lake Elsinore up near me, and I decided to try it. And I went to that meeting. It wasn't attached to anything on a larger level. So they weren't attached to San Diego or to Orange County, any kind of intergroups. They were just kind of winging it on their own. I went there for a year. I mean, I knew they were sharing something I needed, but there was something up with the meeting. When I look back now, I realize that the meeting was not very healthy. That what it was the people who love to control, and that's our starting gate position, us controllers, the ones that like to tell everybody how to do it. Well, you know, there's also those of us in codependency who just kind of like to be told what to do. And so what had happened is those two groups kind of were enmeshed with one another in that meeting. It collapsed, because I think that's what happens with sick meetings, is they kind of collapse. So anyways, then there was no more meeting. I had that book, but I couldn't hold the change, you guys, because I didn't have a village. So life continued on. I was back in AA again, trying to get pregnant through fertility for quite some time. Took us 7 years. Actually got twin girls. I'm so grateful for that. Gorgeous, beautiful girls 20 years ago. And one of them is on the autism spectrum. This is important for me to say out loud, because this is places I struggle now in my codependency. The symptoms of my beautiful daughter is not only autism, but also a side of bipolar with kind of a side of borderline symptoms and a very explosive, angry meltdowns that last for hours. It's certainly better than it was through all of the youth. My other daughter has PTSD from her sister, and so does my wife. So we have had some struggles in here. And so when we talk about boundaries, it's always important for me, because one of the things I deal with is I do know how to set healthy and loving boundaries, but you know what? Sometimes people in your life cannot honor your boundaries. They can't. And when you are an adult, you have choices about who you have in your life and who you don't in our autonomy, but not when it comes to your children. And I suppose there are choices, but not ones that I was willing to do. These are my children, and I was going to care for them to the best of my ability. And even to this day, my daughter has a very difficult time in her mental illness, allowing other people their space and their boundaries. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Not that I have any great solutions for that, but it is a continuing struggle where I try to find balance. When I knew I was going to have children, by the way, I thought, man, I better get ready, because I still had all of this messed up stuff from growing up in this religion that had told me that I did not belong and that me, who I was not acceptable. Early on, I tried to move into Buddhism. So when I got sober the first time, I just bought, I don't know, like 10 books trying to figure out how I was going to have some type of a higher power in my life, you know. And that is actually part of my path now. Eastern philosophy is a very big part of my spiritual recovery, but also needing to make peace with my Christian upbringing was also going to be very important for me. And so I started reading and studying then to try to gain as much as I could to deepen myself in our step 11, you guys, which is enlarging our spiritual life. So that was a big part of my life back then. When the girls were 20 months old, our house burnt down. That was a very hard transition in life. Already we were having some financial issues, but we lost the house and we had to move. And a year after that, my mom died of lung cancer. Just a little bit after that, Lorian got very sick with pancreatitis from the fertility meds that she had been using, that we had been, you know, using to get pregnant, and she ended up in the hospital. I have 20-month-old children. I have to move a household. All of this just proved so overwhelming to me. And so I relapsed, and that was 4.5 years after my previous relapse. So I'm one of those people who know that even if you're sober from substance, it's not a guarantee. I can get long periods of time and I can relapse, because I know that my relapsing with drugs and alcohol is very much related to my codependency. I wrote down, I wasn't going to keep her happy enough to continue validating me in the manner I needed. That is just true with Lorian. Lorian got out of the hospital, by the way. I had been drinking for a little while already. I got discovered because I'd been trying to keep that secret. She found out, very close to losing my whole family then. I ended up back in AA, and my birthday, my CoDA birthday and my AA birthday are together, and they are June. So June 13th, 17 years ago. I think that's 2004. I began my CoDA date at that time because that was when I absolutely realized that I better be serious in CoDA, or I wasn't going to be able to maintain my sobriety. I knew that really well. And I was also scared to death, because if since I was continuing to blame Lorian for my relapsing and for my unhappiness, I had decided that I wouldn't also be able to stay with my wife. Sobriety had to come first, because I can't do anything unless I'm sober. That's where I was. I was very unhappy, and I was absolutely no closer to feeling lovable, loving, and loved. There wasn't any CoDA meetings in my area back then. And I was very, very grateful when there was a person who I was going to AA with, and her al-anon sponsor decided to pick up a popular book because I didn't know anything else existed. And there were 12 steps for codependence. And I just jumped both feet into that. There's about 6 of us that went and we worked those steps together. I think the group kept meeting until we hit about steps 8 or 9. And then it disbanded and I didn't stop because I kept going. I finished the rest of those on my own. Didn't know about you guys in CoDA. I didn't know if there was a blue book available back then. I knew nothing. I just knew that I needed to get, I needed to be in recovery. What I did is I waited for people after that. I called, it's been about a year or so, but I called the people from that group and said, hey, we need to start a CoDA meeting. So nobody would start a CoDA meeting. I kept bugging them and I thought somebody for sure would start a CoDA meeting and they didn't. And so finally I went on, I found CoDA.org and I found out how to start a CoDA meeting. And so I did that news release and I went to the first CoDA meeting. Some of those ladies came with me. We met in my house, but they didn't like the idea that there were pets and children that were loud, and they wanted to change venues. And so I found a place in town in Temecula, and we started meeting there. And darn it, within a week or 2, they all stopped coming. And so I would go with my book by myself to the meeting, and I would wait for people to show up. For a long time, nobody did, but I had that blue book. I had the book and I would read a story and I would read all those 4 foundational docs that we have. And then I'd read a story. And if nobody showed up, I'd go home. And you know what? I left my book out. And what it reminded me of every time I saw it is that I was doing something new. I need to keep doing this journey of recovery. And I was very grateful, by the way, when somebody from San Diego heard about the meeting. And so they came and joined me. And then pretty soon there was another and another. And so we had 4 people after 5 months. I think it took 5 months, and we had 4 people who were going to the meetings. And so finally I had a CoDA group that I could go to. That's when I learned, by the way, about the patterns of recovery. I love those recovery patterns. When I read those patterns for the first time, I scored 75%. Any of you, maybe the rest of you score really high like me, you know, but I got 75, at least 75% of those. Some of the ones I suffered from for sure was I had an inability of asking for help. I used blame and shame to manipulate others. I suffered from perfectionism and definitely emotional isolation. So I cover my feelings very well with isolation, with humor, with other things. And I don't know that I'm trying to cover them on purpose. I just, you know, when you're used to going, you know, emotions are painful to you, well, you're doing everything you can to run away from those. When I came into recovery, I had 2 emotions. I had okay and rage. You know, those were the 2. And what I had to realize is there's like 400 others in the middle. My journey included being willing to feel those emotions that I didn't have the courage to feel. So I have written here, I met with others, the village, I like to call them, the CoDA village, who also wanted to recover from codependency. I found those patterns. I found the literature that was there. San Diego gave us $75 worth of free literature to start our meetings. Another meeting started from that Thursday night meeting. The Tuesday meeting started, and then the Saturday meeting started. And then now we have another one on Sundays and here in the Valley. The steps, the traditions, to me, mindfulness are very big parts of my journey. They're very necessary. Mindfulness, dropping into my body, is how I know I'm having a reaction. When I drop into my body, I know that, you know what, I might have more soldiers on the ground than I thought. It's very important to me to know that I'm triggered, not in order to shame myself anymore, but to realize that if I'm triggered and having a reaction, that that I'm afraid. And when I'm afraid, you know, what fearful people need is to be soothed. And so that was something that I needed to learn how to do, not somebody who was going to go, oh, you know, shame myself and what's the matter with you? How come you can't do this? Or to try to give myself affirmations. By the way, while I love affirming things, I also know that if I'm trying to give myself an affirmation that is too high of a step past where I am, I already know that that doesn't work. That just reaffirms my old beliefs. And so I need to make sure with my affirmations that they are just my next step. I could not look in the mirror. When you guys were telling me, look in the mirror and say, I love you, I could not do that. There was no way I was going to be able to do that. That would create nausea for me for many years. That just wasn't my way to do it. Could I look in the mirror and say, you don't suck as much as you did yesterday? Maybe that was a better one for me, you know, but I couldn't take those big, long leaps. It just wasn't going to be able to do that. So this journey is a spiritual one to me. When I started in CoDA, just like when I started in AA, I still needed to work through all these traumas and triggers of my past. You guys know that I have probably many of the things that most people do with that molest. I was raped. I was suicidal. I just had lots of things, you guys. Lots of things happen to people who drink like me and who use drugs like I did. And so there was things for me to heal from. I had found what I used to do that I didn't really understand, but this was one of my means before that I carried into my recovery. But I would tell people my stories, like these victim stories, because what I needed to do, and I needed to tell it the way I needed to tell it so that I can build it for you so I could see it in your eyes. I wanted you to have the pain, to feel the pain that I felt, that somehow that validated me, you guys. I was building my story for you so I could see it over and over. And this was how I wanted to feel loved. But nobody could do it, really. You know, nobody has that kind of time either, I just want to say, because I'd need a long time and I need you to really listen and really give me your ear so that I can tell you what it felt like to be me so I could see you. And so what ended up happening is I kept hurting myself over and over and over because I was expecting other people to do something that was actually something I needed to do in here. This was a spiritual healing that I needed, and I thought it came through you. And what this was, by the way, this loneliness I felt growing up. I don't know if any of you relate with that, but God, I felt so lonely because emotionally, I just had no family to connect to. And then I just kept recreating that in all the relationships. And then drugs and alcohol don't help. And then you give those up, you know. And then now I'm just trying to share in my meetings and get people to understand. And it just felt lonely. And then when I realized this, super important, a realization for me, is that nobody else was really, like, for one, I have every reason in the world to be exactly who I am, you guys. I was trained to be me. All of us are just trained to be who we are from our upbringing. I can look at all the patterns that I have now. I can go back in my life and I can find out where I got those. I know why I am the way I am today. I got that. And I also know that you all have your journeys too. So you are all trained to be exactly who you are too, right? Which, by the way, you aren't put here for my healing, regardless of how I feel about that. You know, you are here for your own journey of happiness, just like me. And so when I realized that I can try and explain to the best of my ability so you can understand me, and you know what? You never really will. Because you will never see me through your own beliefs and ideas and values and your own way of thinking about life and believing about life, which will have you see me through that veil, you see, just like me with you. Gosh, when that dropped in, you guys, I felt like this existential loneliness that lasted for years because I just stopped talking, because I realized that what I was after was not available here. It wasn't available head to head. What was available for me, though, was for me to drop down and be able to get deeper, because when I realized that, it just stopped me from trying to get something out of you that you weren't designed to have. And then I found really the one that needed to really love, really validate me was me. And gosh, it took a while, you know. But once I started, and this kind of came with a series of the way there's some meditations that I was doing at the time. And basically what ended up happening, because I didn't give up going to meetings. I didn't give up sharing in meetings. What I did give up is that thing I was trying to do, where I was trying to get you to shed tears for me so that I could see my pain in your face. I stopped doing that, because that has some detriment, you guys. What that meant is that if I was trying to get that reaction out of you, I didn't have much time to listen to you. I didn't have time to hear your stories. And I really needed that in order to create intimate relationships. So I needed to be able to let you go. And so this deeper connection began to unfold, and I began to kind of break open spiritually. And then it dawned on me, this idea, and it's something I say often, is I say, when I no longer need you to be anything for me, I am free. It means that I don't have to hustle you. I don't have to make you see me in any certain way. I can allow you to be you. So if what I need is not available from you, then I have choices, you know. Another thing I realized is that when I was doing that, I was giving over my value and worth to other people to prove it to me. What a powerless position. I no longer want to give my value and worth over to others to prove it. Because I know today that my worth is not based on my failures or my successes. My worth today cannot be added to or subtracted from. I'm already worthy. And you know what? When I know that about me, I know that about all of you too, that we are already worthy without changing. See, the thing I need to change are my behaviors and my beliefs. When I came into CoDA, unless I worked steps, unless I looked at those patterns and worked those, unless I opened up to others and was available for other people's input, I wasn't going to ever be able to change how I thought. And if I don't change how I think, I'm not going to be able to change how I behave. And so the steps are very important in learning for me, in order to learn how to think differently so that I could feel differently. When I realized that I didn't need to hustle for my worth anymore, I began to feel loved and lovable. I thought I needed to get it from you first. And what I found out is that I needed to get it from me first. And so I learned how to love myself. I learned how to see myself as lovable, that I was allowed to make mistakes. I was allowed to be imperfect. When I began to allow those things in me, true love kind of began to develop. And then I began to realize that you and how you believed about me didn't have a whit to do with my worth at all. I had to let go of God, by the way, and my ideas about God and who God was supposed to be, and my expectations and those old ideas, because I had to let my idea of God grow. And the very minute I think I know who God is, I've made God too small. And so I no longer even use the term that much. I use it because it doesn't bother me anymore, but it doesn't have a huge meaning for me, because that God from my youth had a lot of baggage that I need to let go. My third step, by the way, is generally I just turn my life over to the care of. And I kind of stop right there. My life is just being turned over to the care of. And that's okay if I don't define that. I'd rather leave it undefined, because it's way bigger than I know. my old friend, AA friend, Ortega Kathy, she says, there's more than you know, and it's not what you think. And I love living in there. So what I do, by the way, and where my values are in this love-based program that we have, is I follow what I call my qualities of heart. And so what I want in my life today is I definitely want my behaviors to change, but what I found is I can't focus so much on behaviors. I focus on what I heard shared so many times is in this love-based program, what is the most loving thing? What is the most loving thing for me to do, not only for you, but for me? And what I'm trying to do in life is no longer these achievements. They are more, I'm following love. I'm following what is compassion, forgiveness, mercy, grace, generosity. These are where the deep meaning is for me. And I know my answers are going to be found as I follow that path, as long as I don't put myself out of the circle, that I also belong in that circle, that of this equal partnership that you and I have. So what is the most loving thing? That is actually the question I'm answering all the time. Before I share a closing story, I just want to say, if you are new to CoDA, keep coming, because this has been over 17 years. And I did have to deal with all of those triggers and the traumas. But as I was doing that, I was just learning more and more, and learning that the way was always gentle. The way was never harsh. The way is not shameful. The word selfish doesn't enter my vocabulary anymore. I find the definition of selfish, by the way, means that I'm doing something, I'm going to put myself first to the detriment of you. And to be honest with you, I don't do that anymore. Not very often. My struggles are when I won't put myself in there at all. And I had to learn how to take care of myself so that I didn't have that guilt and that shame in there, because I was actually taking care of my needs at all. So I had to learn how to actually count myself in there and find out what I needed as well. So if you're new, go to the meetings, listen, be kind to yourself. Allow your thoughts to change by reading the material and by working on the steps. And for God's sake, don't do anything perfectly. We need to change the way we think, though, and we do it gently. So the steps really are the path. So just to close, I want to tell you this beautiful story I heard. I've heard it a couple different ways, but I love the way that I heard it the first time, and it was about a monastery. It was a very old monastery, and this is about the 1950s. And they had this big beloved statue out in the front near the gate. There was a big clay statue of a Buddha, and they loved this. It had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they got notice, though, that there was going to be a freeway that was going to be coming through. And so they needed to be able to move the location of this monastery. And so they had to move this big statue of the Buddha. Anyways, it was edging towards night, but the crane came to lift up the Buddha. But surprisingly, it couldn't actually lift it. And instead, it ended up cracking it, unfortunately. And so they stopped for the night. And later, one of the teachers came out and was shining a flashlight to assess the damage. And as he shined the flashlight into this Buddha, into the crack, very surprised to see gold glinting back. And so they waited till the morning, and then they started cleaning away the clay that was all around this Buddha. And what they found inside was this solid gold Buddha. And what they thought is probably been hundreds of years earlier, when there was invaders coming, and they were going to raid the village there. And so they just assumed that the people just smeared clay all over that thing, and just to hide it. And apparently it worked, but see, nobody knew, because everybody in the monastery was killed. So that secret just went on for hundreds of years. So I love this story, because this is the story of all of us, and it's my story as well, that life has thrown up a lot of clay and a lot of dirt all over who I really am. And because of all of that, I've learned how to behave in certain ways. And those ways don't bring healthy relationships to me. And they have me harming other people because in my fear, I was going to harm others just like they were going to harm me. As I came into CoDA, we started scraping away the layers of dirt and clay till we can see who I really am. And who we all really are is whole and lovable and loved. And I thank all of you for being here and hanging out to the end of this conference to hear my story. Thank you. Thank you.